Hello and welcome to my Top 100 video. I am Greg Stewart. This is my channel. I've been working on this video for about 2 years now. It actually started as a series of smaller projects, but I decided to consolidate the whole thing into one big Top 100 video that's taken way longer than I expected to finish, but it's finished. It's finally done. So what I've basically done is I've been gaming and collecting since probably the late 70s. So I've taken stock of everything in my collection, picked out my top 100 favorite games and ranked them. Like I said, this has been about 2 years is when I actually made the list, so anything that's super recent will not be on this list, so you won't see any Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart or Spider-Man or anything like that, but I'm still pretty happy with the way this came out. So please enjoy, and let's get on with the list.
On your mark, get set.
Decathlete is by far my favorite track and field game of all time. I don't usually go in for the finger-cramping, button-mashing play style of these types of games, but something about Decathlete just appeals to me. It's probably the combination of Sega's weird and wonderful characters and the fact that I never played more multiplayer games in my life than I did in the late 90s, surrounded by roommates who were just as excited as I was to shave a tenth of a second off our best times in the 100-meter dash. 2003 was the Christmas of Ubisoft, where they released two true classics within weeks of each other, Beyond Good and Evil and Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time. A complete reboot of the franchise, series creator Jordan Mechner was on board as a consultant and writer. The result is an absolute masterpiece of a game, featuring gorgeous graphics, awesome combat, and clever use of a rewind feature. I also absolutely love how the whole story is narrated by the prince himself in the past tense. It leads to clever dialogue when the player dies, as the prince seems to be misremembering the events of the story. Take the 360-degree shooting action of Panzer Dragoon, mix it with dazzling visuals and a killer soundtrack which is actually affected by your actions, and you've got Rez. Playing this game for the first time was a revelation. Is it a raver game, a stoner game, I don't really care. It's an absolute joy to play, and the various HD remakes, 3D and VR versions that have come out in the ensuing years have only made the game that much better.
You'll never succeed. Not in 100 million years.
I will too succeed! No, wait, maybe not. I'm pathetic.
Back when I reviewed Gitaru-Man for EGM, I believe I gave it a 6.5 because I couldn't recommend a full-price game with such a short runtime. Nonetheless, this Koei classic remains one of my favorite games ever, and the short runtime is actually a blessing since it's possible to enjoy the whole thing in one sitting. The gameplay is accessible, the characters are endearing, and the soundtrack is one of the best ever made.
Look, Mr. Bubbles, it's an angel. I can see light coming from his belly.
Somewhere beyond the sea,
I was completely sold on this game from the second I saw an original trailer, fascinated with the setting of a full 1950s-era city existing at the bottom of the ocean. Lucky for me, there was a fantastic first-person shooter built around the unique setting of Rapture, featuring a wonderful mix of shooting and special abilities in the form of DNA-altering plasmids. Perhaps my favorite memory, though, is the way the game played with the idea of narrative, preying on a player's predilection to follow instructions given by their guide. Brilliant.
Then straight to her arms I'd go sailing.
Alan Wake took a long time to come out, with a teaser trailer being shown in 2005, a full 5 years before release. But it was totally worth the wait. Alan Wake is presented like a television show played across 6 episodes and is one hell of a thriller. I couldn't put it down on my first playthrough. The use of music and lighting to build suspense to a crescendo during gameplay is simply awesome. It's a crying shame that a sequel does not appear to be happening anytime soon. Castlevania 2 gets a lot of flack. I would argue that it was a precursor to what the series would become a decade later, starting with Symphony of the Night. This Metroid-Light combined the action introduced in the original NES Castlevania with exploration and RPG tropes that, in my opinion, only suffers due to the god-awful English localization, which somehow excised pretty much every useful hint from the townsfolk in the game. This was the first game I bought with my own money after we got our NES, and so still holds a special place in my heart. My earliest memories are of playing our Atari 2600 with my brother. Much Asteroids and Combat was played, but Dodge'em is the game we kept coming back to. Every day after school, we'd fire up this early maze game, where the goal is to collect as many pallets as possible while moving in opposite directions. It was simple and fun, and we whiled away hours competing with one another. Imagine my delight when I learned years later that this is basically a clone of a 1979 arcade game from Sega called Head On. Guess I was a Sega kid even back in 1980. I'd have to say racing is my favorite genre, but Metroid-style adventures are a very close second. And when Guacamelee came along, I was totally ready for a new one. I love the look and humor in this game. Extremely tight and responsive controls make even the most difficult challenges fun to play, and the constantly growing ability set keeps the game fresh throughout. It didn't hurt that it was created by a Canadian studio either. I really need to get off my butt and try Guacamelee 2. Christmas nights represent so many things I loved about gaming in the 90s. This free demo, which was an awesome idea to begin with, took full advantage of the relatively new idea of a console system clock by drastically changing up the look of its content based on the time of year. For 11 months, this was a straight-up demo of nights. During December, everything is overhauled to be more Christmassy, from character outfits to the animated intro of the game. Plus, Christmas Nights gave people a taste of the innovative A-Life system and a fully 3D Sonic game as a bonus. So much to love here. Including Moonwalker on this list in a post-Leaving Neverland world is kind of difficult, but whatever Michael Jackson may have done, and I'm rapidly losing faith, I can't deny the huge impact his music had on my childhood. And that's why I adore Moonwalker. This was two of my favorite things in the world, video games and Jackson's music, colliding in a super creative way. Even outside the famous dance attacks, where Michael clears the screen with killer choreography, I've always been really impressed by how the designers incorporated his signature moves into the platforming and fighting mechanics. F1 Beyond the Limit was one of the first sports games I remember playing that went beyond simply allowing you to control licensed drivers on real tracks. This is literally a recreation of the 1993 season, featuring loads of details down to late season driver changes at various teams, like McLaren switching out Michael Andretti for Mika Hakkinen. It was also the first time I remember playing a console F1 game where setups really seemed to matter. Plus, it has a fantastic series of challenges to complete based on historical situations. Beyond the Limit was an early taste of what an F1 console game could be. Papo and Yo caught my interest after the very first teaser trailer. The story of a boy and his monster companion who is both his most important ally and his greatest enemy. Learning that the entire thing was an allegory for designer Vander Caballero's relationship with his alcoholic father grabbed me even further. There's a really interesting dynamic in Papo and Yo, where the protagonist has to willingly hurt his companion in order to progress sometimes, and the way the game ends is genuinely touching. The Sega CD was home to a few great shooters, and Sylphid is near the top of the list. I had no idea at the time that this Game Arts title was actually a reimagining of a previous computer game. Not that it really mattered. All I knew was that my Sega CD was once again playing a game that was impossibly good looking. Sure, it was just a few simple polygon enemies over a full motion video background, but it sure didn't feel that way at the time. I was raised on Sierra Online adventure games, and though I loved pretty much all of them, the Space Quest series in particular spoke to me. The constant nerdy references to Star Wars, Star Trek, and other sci-fi staples always made me smile. And while subsequent games in the series were pretty damn awesome, Space Quest 3 holds a special place in my heart as it was, I believe, my first exposure to the series. I mean, it's no Leisure Suit Larry, but really, what is? As a huge fan of the film and Michael Crichton's original book, I was deeply disappointed with most of the Jurassic Park games that came out in the mid-90s. The Sega CD version, however, was a refreshing point-and-click take on the story that references the book along with the film. The addition of Robert Backer offering up hints in the form of educational content about dinosaurs is a really nice touch that adds a layer of authenticity and a true multimedia feel to the whole thing. I was super excited when it was revealed that Westwood Studios was creating a Blade Runner adventure game. Rather than put players in the shoes of Rick Deckard, this story takes place parallel to the events of the movie, with your case weaving in and out of scenes from the film. This means tons of fan service and familiar characters all living within a beautifully realized version of director Ridley Scott's dystopian future Los Angeles. Even today, the visuals hold up really nicely. I always sucked at Laserdisc titles in the arcade, but I sure love them, and while there are versions of Road Avenger that feature much better graphics, it's the Sega CD version that makes my soul smile. The main reason is most likely the fact that this version doesn't feature a reticle that you need to aim at hotspots during turbo boosts, or the fact that the levels are randomly reversed during each session. No, honestly, it's that amazing theme song, scientifically proven to be the greatest video game opening of all time. Shining in the Darkness was my first real experience with a 3D dungeon crawler. I'd tried stuff like Wizardry previously, but bounced off them pretty quick. Something about Shining just spoke to me though. I absolutely love the presentation here. I love that the music at the pub can be heard when you're navigating the town. I adore the trademark climax character designs. It's a shame that the sequel, Shining in the Holy Ark, happened during Sega's terrible pre-rendered sprite days on the Saturn. Ridge Racer was pretty cool in the arcade, but the PlayStation version? Nah. Rage Racer, however, is just awesome. I find it hard to pinpoint exactly what makes Rage Racer so appealing to me, but I think the main bit is the control. The first two Ridge Racer console versions felt uncontrollable to me, while I took to Rage Racer immediately. I really dig the music in this one as well. Even to this day, I like to pick up Rage Racer and play a few races, even though I can only do so much with digital controls. A true classic and tragically overlooked installment of the series. It's true that Panzer Dragoon 2 is a better game, and Panzer Dragoon Saga is a fantastic RPG, but when I think of my favorites, I always go back to the original. Panzer Dragoon was a revelation when the Saturn launched, a wholly unexpected masterpiece amidst the known quantities of Daytona USA and Virtua Fighter. Gorgeous music and unique gameplay set in a beautifully realized world has kept me coming back to the original Panzer Dragoon for 25 years now. After the first two Lunar games, I was hungry for any new RPG from Game Arts, and Grandia didn't disappoint. Featuring a lush 3D world and gorgeous music, I was so excited about Grandia I imported it from my Saturn and played through it without knowing a lick of Japanese. It features my absolute favorite RPG battle system of all time, putting importance on character speed and positioning while making it very easy to manage both. Imagine my excitement when my very first assignment for my first industry job at Expert Gamer magazine was to write a walkthrough for the PlayStation version of this great game.
Drivers, start your engines.
When I was growing up, the Daytona 500 was my family's Super Bowl. We had watch parties every year. Stock car racing was in our blood. So Papyrus NASCAR simulators were something I always lusted after. When I finally bought myself a computer capable of running it, NASCAR 2003 season was the first game I bought. The game itself is great, and the modding community at the time was amazing. Plus, I was lucky enough to get into an online league full of incredibly kind and generous racers. It was one of the best gaming periods of my life. The first issue of Nintendo Power to come to Canada was the Mega Man 2 cover, and one of the games covered extensively on the pages within was Faxanadu, an action RPG that I had never heard of before. Those pages were all it took to convince me I needed to try this game, and it immediately became a favorite. The expansive world and beautiful music hooked me pretty much immediately. I had no idea it was part of the Xanadu series, and I've never really been a big fan of the rest of the games in that franchise. There were so many arcade games that I experienced first on the NES, and in a lot of cases, I feel the NES games are much better than their arcade predecessors. I don't know that most people would agree with me when it comes to Double Dragon, but I sure love this version of the game. Okay, there's no two-player mode, but it's been replaced by a cool RPG-style level-up system where Billy Lee learns new moves as he passes each point threshold. I love this game so much I even played through the Game Boy port a couple years later. Have I ever mentioned that I once sold my entire Super Nintendo, Genesis, Sega CD, and 32X collection to buy a 3DO? Not my proudest moment. The need for speed is one of the reasons why I did it. This spiritual successor to the Test Drive series wooed me with the ability to drive real dream cars down long stretches of open road. It featured amazing graphics for the time, loads of flashy videos of said cars, and endless so bad it's good taunting from the actor portraying your rival. It was the birth of an incredible series. I was all in on the Dave Perry-style platformers of the early 90s, and Earthworm Jim was the best of them. The gameplay I loved combined with genuinely creative characters and funny gags. Earthworm Jim Special Edition took the Genesis game, better than the Super Nintendo by the way, and added Red Book audio and some all-new stages, including areas where Jim spent time outside of his atomic supersuit. And the ending to the easy mode is absolutely hilarious. How many hours did my brother and I spend creating motocross courses that we couldn't save? So many hours. Excitebike's extreme simplicity is its strength. It's so satisfying when you land a huge jump just right on a downslope because you judge the angle of your impact perfectly. The addictive gameplay loop makes up for the fact that there's not much more here than the ability to race the clock, though being able to challenge your friends to master courses you created was a huge plus as well. Early 90s Konami is best Konami, and their first 16-bit Contra game truly stands the test of time as one of the greatest running guns ever. Part of me thinks that Contra Hardcore is probably the better Contra game, but due to the Genesis game's insane difficulty, Contra 3 just means so much more to me. Everything is just turned to 11 in this game. It truly feels like an evolution of Contra and Super C, which were already two of my all-time favorites. You won't find another game that puts the Sega CD through its paces like Batman Returns. The driving segments truly show off what the hardware was capable of and were worth the price of admission alone. But I also really love the other half of the game, which is just a recreation of the Genesis cartridge. No, it doesn't look very pretty compared to, say, Konami's Batman Returns on the Super Nintendo, but I really enjoy the item-based gameplay, where managing your inventory of wonderful toys becomes the key to success in the game. The whole package is brought together with what is, I think, my favorite Spencer Nielsen soundtrack on the system. Owning Alicia Dragoon back in 1992 was like knowing the best secret. No one seemed to have heard of this game, even though it was published by Sega itself. Alicia Dragoon features unique platforming that involves using your homing lightning attack in conjunction with one of 4 different companions. Both Alicia herself and her companions can level up throughout the game if you take the time to search every nook and cranny of each level. This is an early Genesis game by Game Arts, created in conjunction with Gainax, the anime studio responsible for Neon Genesis Evangelion. I'm so happy to see Alicia Dragoon getting a re-release on the Genesis Mini. The first and last time I was into first-person shooter deathmatch, and it's entirely due to working at EGM. Soon after we got our Xboxes and review copies, it was a regular occurrence for most of the magazine staff to stay after work, break into teams, and plug those consoles into the office network. We'd then play hours of Capture the Flag, and it was glorious. I really like Halo as a single-player game as well, but never got into any of the sequels nearly as much as the first one. Ninja Gaiden was a revelation the first time I played it. The story scenes were unreal, and the gameplay itself, nothing felt like Ninja Gaiden. Control is incredibly tight and precise. Ryu Hayabusa feels glued to the floor with extremely quick jumps and sword strikes. And you need them too, because this game gets ridiculously hard after a while. Though I have to say, the fact that Ninja Gaiden features one of the all-time greatest video game soundtracks helped me to power through in spite of the crazy difficulty.
Hey, it's time to make some crazy money. Are you ready? Here we go!
Get in already. Take me to the table.
This is another game I got to cover in my time at Expert Gamer. Crazy Taxi is one of the best games on the Dreamcast. It's such a weird premise for an arcade game, but picking up and dropping off passengers is loads of fun, especially when you master the crazy drift. There's a surprising amount of depth to Crazy Taxi, where being a great cabbie requires learning the best route through the city.
Get in. Take me to the yacht harbor. Say, fly. Oh, that hurts. Pay more attention.
I didn't own a PC or a Mac when I was a kid, so my access to adventure games was pretty limited. So it was awesome when Kemco Seika brought 3 of the Mac Venture Games series to the NES. Shadowgate is, by far, the best of these. The best graphics, the greatest soundtrack, and the coolest setting of all. Figuring out all the puzzles in Castle Shadowgate was tough in the days before GameFAQs, but hey, that's what Nintendo Power was for. Back when I talked about Space Quest, I mentioned that I never had a PC when I was a kid, so my PC gaming experience is limited to what my best friend had copies of. By far the game we played the most was Leisure Suit Larry in the Land of the Lounge Lizards. Of course, we had to do so when his parents weren't around. What if they saw us watching that pulsing censored box? The biggest challenge in this game was answering the questions at the start, where you had to prove you weren't a kid. I am a huge fan of Grand Theft Auto 3, but I'm a bigger fan of 80s music, so Vice City was the perfect storm as far as I was concerned. I spent so much time with this game. It was such an enormously anticipated title near the end of my run at EGM. One of the last major projects I remember working on was a big strategy article for the launch of the game. The Ratchet & Clank series has had its ups and downs, but throughout it's been pretty solid. Tools of Destruction sticks with me as one of my favorite experiences in the franchise. It just feels like the perfect culmination of the gameplay and presentation that the developer had been perfecting for years, and Captain Quark is one of the best characters in all of video games. While the whole world was anticipating Final Fantasy VII, Konami was releasing some absolutely spectacular role-playing games on the PlayStation. Suikoden is on my list not only because it's seriously one of the best RPGs you'll ever play, but because it was such a pleasant surprise when I first played it. It hadn't been hyped to death, so I really didn't know what to expect. That's not something we get to experience very much anymore. Wing Commander is one of the few franchises that appears on this list twice. I love this series, and Wing Commander 4 is responsible for my family finally buying a computer that could, play modern games. I doubt my dad knew at the time of purchase, but I convinced him to pony up the cash somehow. Wing Commander 4 is a wonderful conclusion to the original series storyline, featuring great space combat and great performances by actors such as Mark Hamill, John Rhys-Davies, and Malcolm McDowell. Not to mention Thomas Biff Tannen Wilson chewing up the scenery as Maniac. I love the twists and turns this game takes. I remember the first time I ever fired up Eco, it was a preview build, but even in its incomplete state, I was struck by just how beautiful this game is. The wonderfully realized world reminded me so much of Panzer Dragoon. You could just tell there was a rich history lurking right outside the margins of what you were seeing in the game. And having two main characters who can't communicate with each other verbally, but depend on each other totally, really added an interesting twist to a game all about protecting your counterpart. Guardian Heroes was Treasure living up to its reputation of pushing the limits of any genre it took on. While everyone else on the planet seemingly decided that games had to be 3D from then on, Treasure released a 6-player beat-em-up utilizing their tremendous knowledge of crafting amazing 2D experiences. Throw in some role-playing style character development and you've got a truly wonderful game. Final Fight hasn't aged all that well, it's true, but this creaky old beat-em-up holds a special place in my heart as it's one of the few arcade games I played over and over again as a kid. When the Super Nintendo version was released, I was all kinds of disappointed, especially when Streets of Rage was sitting right there in my Genesis. But then the Sega CD version of Final Fight came out and I was in love. It's still my favorite way to play the game today. Paper Mario on the N64 was great, but the GameCube really did the unique visual style justice, being able to pull off 3D elements that felt more connected to the paper-thin Mario characters. The battle system features the Twitch-style elements we've come to expect in just about any role-playing game starring Mario and friends. It can be a bit repetitive, but it kept the game from becoming boring during long play sessions. This is by far my favorite game in the Paper Mario series, though the Mario and Luigi series is pretty darn great as well. Bionic Commando is another one of those NES arcade ports that is just so much more than the game it's based on. In fact, for years my friends and I had no idea there was an arcade version of Bionic Commando. This is such a unique game. A platform shooter with no jump button. Mastering swinging from platform to platform could be frustrating at first, but you felt like a god when you finally nailed it. And then you get to watch Hitler's head explode at the end of the game. What a classic. By the time Forza Horizon came around, I was pretty much done with open-world driving games. All the crashing, getting lost, and the endless police chases were more than I could take. Forza Horizon changed the game, shedding all that foolishness for a focus on racing, music, and just having a good time. What a great concept. The music festival setting is an absolute joy, the rewind feature means no mistake is permanent, and the showcase events where you do things like race World War II fighter planes are extremely inventive. Playground Games fixed open world racers with Forza Horizon. When my buddy David first got his Super Nintendo, one of the first games we rented together was Final Fantasy II. I was a Final Fantasy kid on the NES, so I was expecting greatness, but neither of us were prepared for just how great Final Fantasy II was. We ended up playing straight through the weekend, finishing it about an hour before we had to return it to the rental store. It's one of my most precious gaming memories.
Blades of Steel.
Nintendo's ice hockey seems to be the one everyone remembers on the NES, but for my brother and I growing up, Blades of Steel was king. We'd spend hours flipping passes and getting into fights on the virtual ice with this incredible 5-on-5 hockey game. It was technically impressive, it played great, and was yet another favorite NES game where I had no idea it was actually a port of an arcade game. And, as always seemed the case, the NES game was superior. Is Radiant Silvergun the best shooter ever made? Quite possibly. Treasure again works its magic with an amazing game that straddles the line between old school and bullet hell shooters, featuring an innovative new mechanic where you collect certain types of bullets to unleash a massive special attack. Radiant Silvergun really put the Saturn through its paces. The triple weapon system gives you on-the-fly options in every situation, not to mention creative combinations of weapons as well. Plus, if you suck at shooters like I do, your weapons slowly level up across multiple play sessions, so subsequent games actually get easier. There was a time when I was convinced that the X series was a replacement for the original Mega Man franchise. And while playing this game today causes my arthritic old man hands to cramp up thanks to all that Mega Buster charging, I still absolutely adore it. It was so cool to see Capcom try something really different with Mega Man while maintaining the feel of the classic series I love so much. The ability to upgrade X through capsules left by Dr. Light was the icing on the cake of what felt like a truly modern reimagining of one of my favorite series.
We are go for lunch. Okay, ignition on 3. Ready? 3!
To quote Ulysses Everett McGill, it's a fool that looks for logic in the chambers of the human heart. That's the only way I can explain my love for Sewer Shark. This earliest of early full-motion video games for the Sega CD hooked me from the moment I turned it on, probably because of David Underwood's amazing monologue about tube steak and the smell of sewers in the morning.
You nail this one run, and we got a one-way ticket to Solar City.
Sewer Shark is just a short rail shooter interspersed with over-the-top cinemas, and I love every minute of it.
Hey! Relax! Pretend it's a game. Maybe it'll even be fun. Shoot the tubes, dog meat!
End of the Millennium isn't only the best Phantasy Star game, but one of the greatest RPGs of all time. Great music, great graphics, great characters, and a great story told through cinematic cutscenes, which weren't all that common for a cartridge-based role-playing game back in 1993. The whole thing just feels super ambitious, and it was so refreshing after the sort of disappointing Phantasy Star 3. Too bad this is likely the last classic Phantasy Star game we'll ever see. Yeah, we're rocking the original Saturn version here. Going back to Tomb Raider now can be pretty rough, what with the sometimes finicky tank controls, but really, when you put this game in context, it's pretty impressive what core design accomplished. Tomb Raider is supremely playable, even though it only uses digital controls. What music there is fantastic, the various locales are super impressive the first time you see them, and the gunplay is kept to a minimum, something that later sequels overdid in a big way. The early overhead Grand Theft Auto games sucked. They felt basically unplayable. But Chinatown Wars is different. With this portable return to the series' overhead roots, the developers largely fixed the interface problems and churned out an awesome game. I was totally drawn in by the story, buying low and selling high, but never on my own supply, and even enjoyed the touchscreen bits found on the DS version. What a great game. One of the reasons I spent so much money on a 3DO. Up until this point, Road Rash felt like a uniquely Sega Genesis experience, but the 3DO version turned everything up to 11. Super 90s characters, one of the earliest and still one of the best licensed soundtracks around, and a level of speed not seen in the series before, wrapped up in cutting-edge graphics, was a recipe for success. Plus, the full-motion video bits peppered throughout the game are hilarious. Metal Gear Solid was a revelation. On the PlayStation 2, it felt like the host system finally had the power needed for creator Hideo Kojima to actually realize his cinematic vision for the series. The game was just mind-blowing from the very first trailer. And then to have Kojima pull a bait and switch on fans with the introduction of love him or hate him character Raiden, wow. I had that little surprise totally spoiled for me thanks to working at EGM. The reviewers of this game had to travel to California to play it in seclusion due to all the secrecy surrounding the story. That didn't protect me from learning every last detail while proofreading that month's review, weeks before I got to play the game myself. Maybe it's my Canadian upbringing, but where traditional track and field games did very little for me, put some winter sports in there and I couldn't get enough. Winter Heat is every bit as awesome as Sega's Decathlete, but with sports I actually care about, like downhill skiing and short track speed skating. You won't find a finer track and field game anywhere. The GameCube caught a lot of flack for debuting without a proper Mario title on launch day, And I'd say rightfully so. Poor Luigi. Not only was he tasked with shouldering the burden of being the mascot on launch day, but I think the backlash about the lack of a Mario overshadowed what a great game Luigi's Mansion really is. It's the cutest little Ghostbusters game ever, and the first time we got to see what would become Luigi's main personality trait, cowardice. The poor little guy tries to stave off panic as he shakily hums along with the game's music while moving from one ghost-infested room to another. The whole thing is absolutely adorable. After the initial shine wore off my first Sega CD games, I was on the hunt for something new to play. My best friend, who happened to work at a game rental place, recommended Jaguar XJ220 from Core Design. What a perfect suggestion! Jaguar features a World Tour and Grand Prix mode and graphics that really take advantage of the system's much-touted sprite scaling ability. Plus, you can run a co-op season using split screen and extend your races so that pit strategy actually becomes a factor. It's still one of my favorite Sega CD games. Flashback feels like the perfect blend of the old Prince of Persia and Delphine's previous Out of This World. It was a revelation the first time I played it. Conrad Hart is an extremely versatile character in spite of being limited to a 3-button controller. While you feel very vulnerable throughout the game, you also feel extremely capable thanks to the wonderful controls. It's too bad all of the CD-based versions of this game replaced the original low-poly cutscenes with awful CGI.
It's me, Mario!
I gotta say it, most of the N64 library is garbage. Going from the brilliance of the Super Nintendo library to the blurry mess that defined most N64 releases was a tough pill to swallow. If only the bulk of the console's library had been able to come close to the brilliance of the system's first game. Super Mario 64 is a masterpiece. It set the standard for platforming in 3D and still stands as one of the best examples of the genre almost 3 decades later. I was very close to putting Mario Kart 64 on this list, thanks to the endless tournaments we used to play every Sunday at our local game store. But Mario Kart 8 is just perfection. I love that this sequel laid the groundwork for turning the franchise into a larger celebration of Nintendo's properties in general, along the lines of Smash Bros. Or Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing. I never get tired of playing Mario Kart 8. I've never been more into hockey games than I was on the Genesis, and there is no better hockey game from the early 90s than NHL 94. The Sega CD version takes this perfect game and adds player cards, video snippets, a full motion video intro, and in-stadium crowd recordings that just add a little bit more authenticity to the whole experience. I've been in love with the Gran Turismo series since I first imported the original PlayStation game. The series peaked for me with Gran Turismo 3 on the PlayStation 2. The power of the system meant the game was more gorgeous than ever, and even better, I got to handle pretty much all of our major coverage of the game for EGM, which meant hanging out with creator Kazunori Yamauchi at the Detroit Auto Show, hanging with him again in New York City for the game's launch, where I got to meet Indy 500 champion Helio Castroneves, and writing extensive articles about it in the pages of EGM, including a cover story. I didn't get a Super Nintendo at launch because I was 15 and all my money had been sunk into my Genesis collection. My best friend Dave got one though, and while Super Mario World was really impressive, it was F-Zero that actually caught my attention. Like so many racing games through the years, F-Zero truly showcased what this new hardware could do. It's also got a kick-ass soundtrack, something I think it doesn't get enough credit for nowadays. I really wish this series would make a comeback. Paper Mario has already made an appearance on this list, and Super Mario RPG was great, even though it felt like more of a Squaresoft game than a Nintendo game. In my opinion, Mario and Luigi on the Game Boy Advance set the standard for what a Mario RPG should be. The clever puzzles and unique battle system blends perfectly with the brilliant, funny writing to create an experience like no other. It's too bad the series is basically dead, though the Paper Mario series has taken on a lot of the elements I love from the Mario and Luigi franchise at this point. I kind of missed out on the Musha Frenzy. I was always kind of afraid to play it when it was new because I was generally bad at shooters. But this Sega CD follow-up set in ancient Japan is too kick-ass to skip. I love the setting, I love the music, I love that the game is just easy enough that I'm able to finish it. This is one of those games I fire up pretty frequently just to play a couple of levels. Video game comfort food. It's hard to understand just how huge Tim Burton's Batman was if you weren't there to experience it. To a generation raised on reruns of the campy 60s TV show, it was simply amazing. And even though the NES game from Sunsoft doesn't follow the film at all, it does do the movie justice. The perfect controls make the Dark Knight's adventure a pleasure to experience, accompanied by another wonderful soundtrack, which was something we were expecting from Sunsoft at this point. I don't think I was alone in being doubtful of Nintendo's decision to hand the Metroid franchise to a third-party developer after we'd all been waiting over a decade for a sequel, especially since Samus's new adventure was going to be a first-person shooter. But as is usually the case, Nintendo managed to turn my expectations around and put out one of the most unique, atmospheric shooters of the generation. I still can't believe how something so different from the original Metroid formula still feels so much like a proper Metroid game. The sequels didn't really land with me, but the original Metroid Prime is a delight. The Saturn came out right at the perfect time for me. I was living with a group of roommates who were all into the system and its games, which meant that we all competed constantly on Sega's arcade ports. Virtua Cop 2 was, in my opinion, the best light gun shooter around at the time, and I must have played through this thing co-op at least 100 times. We used to set up dining room chairs backwards in front of the TV so we could rest our peacekeeping elbows on them during marathon play sessions. My adoration for the Sega CD is well documented at this point, and I'm sure that has a lot to do with Sonic CD appearing so high on this list. But the main reason is because this feels so similar to the original Sonic the Hedgehog, which is still my favorite game in the series. The time-traveling aspect adds another layer of depth to the formula, and the fully 3D bonus stages really show off what the Sega CD hardware can do. I even like the American soundtrack to the game. In fact, I kind of think those of us on this side of the Pacific got the best of both worlds. Spencer Nilsson's new music and a little bit of the original Japanese soundtrack as well. Mike Tyson's Punch-Out is one of the most brilliant puzzle games of all time disguised as a sports game. Even those of my friends who would turn up their nose at playing a game of NHL or Madden whiled away hours of their lives working their way to Iron Mike. I personally don't usually make it past Bald Bull, but I still love every second I play of this game. I missed out on the first Zelda. By the time we got an NES, Zelda 2 was the new hotness. So A Link to the Past was kind of my first real experience with the original Zelda formula. And since this game is a masterpiece, what a first impression. To this day, I consider A Link to the Past to be the greatest game in the franchise. There's just nothing negative to say about it. My introduction to Japanese role-playing games was Dragon Warrior, thanks to my best friend Dave getting a free copy from Nintendo Power. But Final Fantasy was the holy grail for me. I pined for this game forever. I bought it during one of our annual family trips to Portland, Maine, and during the 10-hour car trip back, I had the instruction booklet, map, and monster gallery pretty much memorized. Every weekend, I'd stay up late, waiting for my dad to go to bed so I could play Final Fantasy on the family TV. Some of my favorite childhood memories. Mega Man 3 doesn't get as much love as it deserves. Coming after the sublime Mega Man 2, which will definitely appear later on this list, I guess it just had too much to live up to. But Mega Man 3 really comes in a close second as far as best games in the franchise. The soundtrack isn't quite as iconic as the previous game, but still stands as one of the best on the system. The Robot Masters aren't quite as familiar, but they're still super creative and hadn't wandered into the absurd like some later installments do. And no need to constantly charge the Blue Bomber's arm cannon, thank goodness. One of the only reasons I hesitated to buy a Genesis back when I started renting the system regularly was the lack of any sort of mascot platformer. And while Castle of Illusion is no Super Mario Bros., it did give me faith that Sega was able to produce something in the genre that is miles better than the Alex Kidd games. Castle of Illusion also proved that it was possible for a playable character to have loads of personality, something Sonic Team would continue to perfect just a year later. When I was 20, I was working at a mall which happened to have an arcade with a Daytona USA machine in it. Every day during my lunch hour, I'd go spend just about the entirety on that machine at, I believe, $1 a race. It wasn't cheap. I loved Daytona so much that I even sunk tons of hours into the Saturn port. So when it was actually released in a more arcade-perfect form on the 360 and PlayStation 3, I was over the moon. By the time Metal Gear Solid hit the PlayStation, 3D games were pretty run-of-the-mill, but this Kojima masterpiece kicked it up a notch. Nothing else on any console felt quite so cinematic. It was amazing to see what the game accomplished on the aging PlayStation hardware. The Metal Gear franchise was already excellent, but Metal Gear Solid boosted it to greatness. The Super Nintendo launch was pretty great, but I think ActRaiser was the first time I was really blown away by the system. I'd never heard a game sound so amazing before. It was like an orchestra right in the console. And not only does it sound great, but the composition is incredible. Not surprising considering Yuzo Koshiro wrote the tunes. The depth of this game combined with the relatively short length makes ActRaiser easy to pick up and play through, even today. Treasure's first game ever was a revelation. I'd never seen anything like the sheer amount of action on the screen in Gunstar Heroes. I was also taken by the fact that a run-and-gun game could feature characters with a pretty wide set of moves, including dive attacks, jump kicks, and the ability to grab and throw enemies. Treasure and Konami were both making the Genesis hardware do things that no one expected, and it made this one of the absolute best times in gaming. Twice already on this list, I've talked about some of the games that convinced me to buy a 3DO, but Wing Commander 3 was the ultimate prize. I fell in love with Wing Commander from the first time I saw the original game on display in the computer section of my local Radio Shack, and was so excited when I finally got to play it on the Super Nintendo a few years later. But owning a computer that could run it, or its sequels, was never really in the cards for my family. When Wing Commander 3 was announced for the 3DO, I felt like it would be on hardware I could actually attain by selling every other game console and game I owned. Wing Commander 3 stands as one of the most successful marriages of full-motion video and top-notch gameplay of the multimedia revolution in the early 90s. It was an incredible accomplishment. Pretty much everyone knows by now that the American Super Mario Bros. 2 isn't the real Super Mario Bros. 2. And thank goodness. This reskinned Doki Doki Panic features a level of polish and amazing gameplay that deserves to be part of Nintendo's flagship series, and is way better than the original sequel. It's such a massive step forward from the original Super Mario Bros., and I'm so glad that so many of the characters and mechanics from this game have become canon. The original Need for Speed was one of the reasons I sprung for a 3DO, and while subsequent versions of the game were pretty good, I was kind of over it by the time the PlayStation 2 came to town. Then, out of the blue, we got Need for Speed Hot Pursuit 2, and I was blown away. This is the perfect mix of speed and control, with track design that makes you feel like a complete badass when you thread the needle through a new shortcut at full throttle. And the whole thing is made even better by one of the best licensed soundtracks at the time. When I was 12 years old, I had the chicken pox. One day, while he was leaving for work, my dad tossed some mail onto my bed. Nintendo was about to offer Nintendo Power in Canada and sent all us Nintendo Power Flash subscribers the first issue for free. I spent the next 2 weeks poring over every page of this amazing periodical. In particular, I was interested in Mega Man 2. It took me a while to find the game for rent after that because it was so popular it was always out. But in the meantime, I finally played the first Mega Man and fell in love. but Mega Man 2 was just so much better in every way. I think this was the first time I realized that video game music was worth listening to, even when you weren't playing. I was pretty much all in on the Game Boy in 1989, but nowhere near as deeply as my friend Evan, who somehow always seemed to get his hands on the latest games. I didn't know all that much about Gargoyle's Quest when I first borrowed it from him, but it quickly became a favorite. I think it was the first Game Boy game that really showed me just how amazing sprite work could look on this little system. Incredible Capcom platforming mixed with RPG elements, which was exactly the sort of thing I was crazy about in 1990. The PlayStation 2 doesn't get mentioned enough when talking about great system launches, but it really was awesome. And the best game, in my opinion, was Ridge Racer 5. It caters to both players who preferred the drift style found in the first PlayStation Ridge Racer, while also being very accessible to those of us who hated it. I played so much of this game. I unlocked everything in the import in order to cover it for EGM and Expert Gamer, then bought it during the US launch and unlocked everything again. Namco games just oozed style in the early 2000s, and Ridge Racer 5's visuals really hold up even today. When I first played Super Castlevania 4, I didn't really like it. I'm not sure why. I thought the graphics were a little messy, I guess. Honestly, I can't remember what it was that didn't sit right with me. Either way, I put the game down and didn't pick it up again for years. And when I finally did, I was struck by what an amazing experience it is, and also by the fact that it has one of the best soundtracks in the franchise, which is really saying something. Capcom was known for their incredible Disney platformers, and DuckTales is the game that reputation was built on. There's a theory that DuckTales was created using the Mega Man engine. While I don't know if that's true or not, it doesn't take much playtime to believe it. Uncle Scrooge shares the same razor-sharp control as the Blue Bomber, plus the ability to start on any level. But that's where the similarities end. It's just a great game all around. The game that Atari and Nintendo very publicly fought over, and for good reason. Tetris is the true definition of a masterpiece, a concept so perfect in its simplicity and execution that it's almost impossible not to like. And what could have been a better packing game for the Game Boy? A title that was no worse for wear even with the tiny, streaky screen, and something that your average adult would have no problem playing, considering Nintendo's push to market the system to your dad instead of you. There still seems to be some debate over which is better, Mario 3 or Mario World, and it confuses me because Super Mario 3 is so obviously the winner. As I said earlier, I adore Mario 2 and all the cool weirdness it brought to the franchise, but Mario 3 is the original format perfected. It's creative, it's gorgeous, there's really nothing wrong with it. I was never really a Half-Life guy, but I'd heard nothing but amazing things about Half-Life 2. So when it was released on the Xbox 360 as part of the Orange box, I grabbed it immediately. I thought Half-Life 2 was okay, but when I checked out Portal, I was hooked. I meant to try it out for 20 minutes or so and ended up playing through almost the entire game in one sitting. The mind-bending puzzles and creative use of portals is matched only by the fantastic writing. GLaDOS is one of the greatest antagonists in all of video games.
The last Metroid is in captivity. The galaxy is at peace.
Of my time at Electronic Gaming Monthly, my most fondly remembered issue has to be number 150, with the Too Many Games cover. In that issue, we did an updated top 100 list and awarded Super Metroid the number 1 spot. While it doesn't quite reach that height on my personal list, there's no denying that this Super Nintendo classic is a total masterpiece. It feels like the system is finally powerful enough to realize the vision of the original NES game. And even though the formula has been copied and refined endlessly over the ensuing years, Super Metroid still feels like it's barely aged. My love of the Sega CD is the main reason I decided to start Generation 16. And in an era where a lot of fans were measuring Super Nintendo and Genesis RPG libraries against one another, it was refreshing to discover a bona fide classic on such a niche system. Sure, looking back on it now, working designs definitely added some cringe-worthy moments to the game, but back then translations of this quality were pretty rare, and the sheer greatness of Lunar outweighed the few dialogue issues. The Saturn and PlayStation remakes of Lunar were excellent, of course, but my heart still belongs to the Sega CD original. Pulling Altered Beast out of the Genesis box and putting Sonic in there instead is one of the ballsiest, brilliant marketing moves in the history of the games industry, and it absolutely worked on me. Up until I started learning about Sonic the Hedgehog, I was happy, though a bit impatient, waiting for the Super Nintendo to come out. But this game, along with my limited experience with Super Monaco GP, Ghouls and Ghosts, and Castle of Illusion, convinced me to dive into the Genesis library instead. I wasn't able to get Sonic as a pack-in, but a few trades later and I had a used copy in my hands. What an awesome game. It still stands up today. Looks gorgeous, sounds even better, crazy tight control, and a lot more depth than most people give it credit for. Outrun always manages to feel like a good challenge and a relaxing ride down the open highway with your best girl. When I was a kid, part of our summer vacation always included heading down to Old Orchard Beach in Maine, which happened to have an amazing arcade. They had a deluxe sit-down version of Outrun, and it's where I spent most of the money my dad would give me for quarters. But even without a steering wheel or a Ferrari replica to sit in, Outrun is loads of fun on home consoles. I even love the Genesis version. And Outrun happens to be the only arcade 1-up machine I've actually purchased. Another wonderful game that those of us who could only read and speak English could only play on the Sega CD. Snatcher was my introduction to the idea of the digital novel. totally a bonus that it was made by Konami, designed by Hideo Kojima, and was an homage to Blade Runner and Terminator, two of my favorite movies. I love this game so much, I generally play through it at least once a year. It's too bad the sequel, or the PlayStation and Saturn remakes, never made it here, although I did run an online campaign in my early internet days to get the Saturn version released. I like to think we came close. My friends and I were so excited about Castlevania Symphony of the Night that I think almost all of us imported it. I was the editor-in-chief of Gaming Age at the time, and basically every writer on the staff was racing to be the first to post a review. I can't remember if I won that race, but I'm sure my review was the best. Super Metroid was amazing, but as far as I'm concerned, Konami perfected the formula with Symphony of the Night. There's a reason the term Metroidvania exists. Symphony is a masterpiece, filled with wonderful little touches like light frost covering some water surfaces, being able to sit in the confessional in the chapel, Alucard's dream about his mother. I could go on and on. Is Sega Rally the greatest racing game of all time? I certainly think so. Having never played the arcade version, Sega Rally on the Saturn is my sole experience with this masterpiece. Since it's an arcade game, there's not a lot of content here, with 4 tracks and 3 cars, but it plays so well that I just can't keep myself from coming back for more. Back when this was new, my roommates and I used to spend hours shaving thousandths of a second off our best times, challenging one another to become just a little bit better. While Squaresoft used the Super Nintendo to take Final Fantasy to a completely new cinematic level with Final Fantasy IV, number 6 is the perfection of that movement. As far as I'm concerned, the series has never topped this installment. I mean, come on, you can suplex a ghost train in Final Fantasy VI. I was 18 when this game came out, and was so blown away by the music that I had to go out and buy a stereo for my tiny bedroom so I could experience the soundtrack properly. Obviously, since you're watching this list, you know this is one of my favorite games of all time, so I was extra excited when it ended up being the first walkthrough I wrote for Expert Gamer when I started my career at Ziff Davis. Anyone who knows me knew Streets of Rage 2 would totally be my number one almost 90 minutes ago, back when you started watching this video. It's hands down the best beat-em-up to ever grace a console. The entire thing, from graphics to moves to music, is dialed to 11. It blew everything else out of the water and has aged incredibly well. I was already a fan of Yuzo Koshiro's music thanks to Revenge of Shinobi, ActRaiser, and the first Streets of Rage, but he outdid himself in this sequel. This was the first video game soundtrack I remember listening to outside of the game itself. My best friend and I used to take this game home from the rental shop where he worked every other weekend, get some snacks, set the game on Mania, and play through it. When we got to the elevator level, we cranked that bad boy as high as it would go and rocked out to the amazing music while doing our best to survive the enemy onslaught. I have so many wonderful memories of Streets of Rage 2. The sequels were nice, but never reached this height. And there you have it, my top 100 games of all time. If I had to do it all again, I doubt I'd land on the same order. But I hope you had fun watching this video, and thank you so much for sticking with me until the end. Please like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. What games did I miss? How would you change the order? And remember that I stream retro games like this and others from my collection on Twitch TV/Sewart every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday night. Please come check it out. Thanks for watching.